Napoleon 1806, the Prussian campaign. The title pretty much tells you where we are and what we are doing. This is a two-player war game. One player will control French forces that are advancing into Prussia and trying to take control of key locations, and the other player is the poor Prussian player scrambling around trying to stop the French player, to inflict some pain, to slow them down, etc., etc. So the game is a two-player game. It can also be played solitaire. If you simply control both sides and you play both sides at the best of your possibilities. The game is card-driven. There is a luck element, so even if you're playing solo, you're still going to have a lot of surprises and dilemmas to deal with. And I always like card-driven games about the Napoleonic age, because it is in this period that the famous Clausewitz developed the idea that of all human activities, the one that most closely resembles war is playing cards. Here with the idea that war is about opportunities that come and go. It's about planning to an extent, but mainly it is about dealing with whatever hand you're given. It's a nice metaphor, and when you see it in a game about that period, to me it's even more fun. The game actually can also be played, there's several variants. There's an advanced version, there's a version in which you can play with hidden components behind the screen, in which case, well, of course, you cannot play solo, but it's perfectly soloable. Now, without further ado, let's take a closer look at Napoleon 1806. This is the map of the game, which is printed on a mounted board that looks really neat. It is a point-to-point map, so units will always reside in a location and then use the connections only to move. Some locations are general locations, some are wooded areas that give an advantage to the defenders. And we also have cities that are important for victory points and again for defensive advantages. This one is under control of the French player at the beginning, and the French player in fact starts around here and will push in that direction, trying to take control of that location and those two cities there. These are all worth victory points. And in fact, the game victory is based on victory points. The marker for victory points start in the position 10 of a victory point track that goes from 0 to 20. You score points by taking control of locations on the map and removing strength points of the opponent. If during the game you manage to pull the marker all the way here, then you win as the Prussian player. If the marker goes there, you win as the French player. So it's very important to take or retain control of these locations. That means that the map will pretty much offer options to the players as to what they want to do. The French player will probably want to push in this direction. They can try to just drive towards those profitable objectives, forcing the Prussian player that starts around here to divert troops to intercept them, or they can give up those two places, which is not a great idea. But of course, if they're intercepting French units advancing there, then this area is not particularly well protected, and maybe there are other French columns that are advancing here or from here. So very interesting decisions. Although the map is pretty much made of, I would say, three main bottlenecks, well, there are a lot of interesting decisions that come from, well, where you're going to allocate your forces and which bottlenecks you choose to defend or use to attack. The position of the units on the board is represented by wooden blocks, but these are not wooden blocks like you have in other war games that are supposed to stand up and you rotate them to indicate different changes in their game status. In fact, you should think of them as counters, as flat counters. For game purposes, they only have two possible game states: active, that is the unit can perform an operation, or you flip it face down as inactive after the unit participated in an operation or in a battle. As you can see, these blocks don't have a lot of information. Some do, but they're mainly reminders of what commanders can do. But there are some, like Ney, that simply don't have anything. So how do we know how strong the unit that Ney is controlling is? Well, we'll look at the player aid, at this very nice player aid. Players of Eurogames rejoice, players of games like Power Grid with a lot of cubes rejoice, because this looks a little bit like a Eurogame. Here you have a player aid that tells you how strong each formation is. So I know that wherever Ney is on the board, he's leading presently 5 units of infantry and 1 unit of cavalry. Blue is infantry, yellow is cavalry. For the Prussian player, gray is infantry and purple is cavalry. Again, they also use wooden cubes on a similar player age to keep track of how many people are there. And the number of people in a unit also influences different other things. For example, how many cards the unit draws in combat. Combat is card-based, is card-driven, and let's just say that the more cards you draw in combat, the better. So if this unit is involved in combat, it will draw 2 cards, and all units, in fact, if they have 5 units of strength or more, 5 groups or more, they draw 2 cards. If they go down to 4 cubes or less, they only draw 1 card. Each unit, each group is also associated with a track which is empty at the beginning. And this is the track where you place fatigue cylinders. They indicate how fatigued the unit is, and a lot of game effects will cause fatigue to accumulate, and when fatigue can also cause you penalties, for example, may reduce your combat effectiveness by reducing a card, you may lose a unit, and ultimately, if you have too much fatigue, if you had to place a fatigue cylinder there, the unit, poof, dissolves. The unit also dissolves, of course, if there is no cube representing the strength of the unit left on that track. We said that combat is card-driven in the game, but a lot of other things are influenced by cards. Each player has a unique deck of cards. The cards have a band here, and the color of the band indicates the phase of the turn in which you can play. There's a number that may be used as initiative or movement number. We'll talk about that. An effect, when you play the card for that effect, you do what it says. And then 2 areas here, one for combat effects and one for recovery effects. Don't worry, we'll talk about those. Now, at the beginning of the turn, you have the draw phase. Both players will draw cards. They play 3 cards. They draw 3 cards, and they put them in their hand. If a red card was drawn, it must be played. It's mandatory. You resolve the effect, which is usually bad, and also that means that now your hand is reduced because you only got 2 new cards instead of 3. After the draw phase, you have the initiative phase. Players draw cards, draw a card from their deck, and they compare the numbers in the top right corners. That is now the number functions as the initiative number. Highest initiative goes first, so the French player here goes first, and the cards used for initiative are discarded. Now, when we determine initiative, also during that phase, if a player has cards with a light blue band, that is when you can play during the initiative phase. Now the operations phase starts, and really it is the heart of the turn and the heart of the game. And during the operation phase, you can do one of several things. You can pass, that's pretty obvious, and the operations phase will be over when both players will pass one after the other. Or you can, do stuff, actually. One thing you can do is to move, or you can just do combat in case your units are in the same location with enemies from the previous turn, or you can do movement and combat. Movement. To do movement, you indicate the location that you intend to activate for movement. You draw a card, and that gives a number of movement points that you can spend. On average, going from one location to an adjacent location following a connection costs 1 movement point. The number of actual movement points that you have may be modified by various things, by cards, by the number of units in the stack that you're moving. For example, a stack with 2 units loses a movement point. Larger stacks lose more movement points. Some commanders may give an advantage in movement, and so you can move up to the number of movement points that you actually manage to generate. After you move, you have to generate fatigue. Well, only if you moved at least 4 spaces. And again, depending on other various factors, a number of fatigue points may have to be assigned to the units in the stack that just moved. Another option is to move and fight. Again, that simply is movement that ends with a combat and you declare combat. It works like normal combat, but with a penalty of 1 card for the attacker. And that is very key because simply combat is super simple. And again, if you already start next to in the same location as an enemy, then as your action, as your operation for that turn, you can simply declare that you're attacking. And combat simply means to try to generate as many cards as possible, to draw that number of cards and see what happens. Usually, again, you draw 2 cards for each chord that is at full strength, 1 for reduced. We saw some of those penalties there. Some commanders may give you extra cards. So once all is said and done, you will have a number of cards that you will have drawn. Again, you lose 1 if you move and attack. You will have a number of cards. And you look at them, and then you simply look at the bottom left corner. Simplicity itself, because that tells you the number of hits inflicted on the opponent. Now the opponent loses 3 cubes from the units involved in the fight, and the number of fatigue points that are also inflicted, and the opponent has to try to distribute them as evenly as possible among the units that were involved in the fight. And then the player does the same. It's pretty much just there is really this idea of the Clausewitzian shock or the grand battle. Just bring as many people there as possible to generate as much strength as possible, and then draw the cards, and combat will happen. As simple as that. So this is really the heart of the game. This is that simple. Movement or combat, or movement followed by combat in the same turn with a penalty for the attacker. After both players, and also important, after you activate units, after you do something with them, they become spent, so you turn them face down. After the operations phase, you have the recovery phase, in which, if you have units that are still face up, that means they didn't do anything that turn, they were not involved in combat, you can remove all of the fatigue from their area on the player rate. Very powerful. But suppose that you did do something and you still want to recover some strength on them, then you can play cards from your hand, and at this time you look at the bottom right corner, and that tells you the number of fatigue points that you can remove from a unit that did act this turn, that is in fact face down. And this is basically it. You continue like this turn after turn until a player manages to reach their necessary number of points to score an instant victory, or if the game continues until the end of turn 7 and the French player has not won, then the Prussian player wins the game. I like the game, I like it as a design a lot. The production, it's more like pluses and minuses. But interesting enough, all of the things that I don't like very much about the production come from the fact that the production is a little too good. It's a little too attractive, too nice. The map looks really nice, but a lot of those locations are very close to one another. That gives it the flavor, the look of a real map, or a fairly realistic looking map. But of course, if those locations were far from one another, then you would have less confusion, the board will look less cluttered, but then the map will look a little more abstract, will look more like a net of locations, which of course is what it is, but still. Those cubes, those wooden cubes, do we need them? In my opinion, no, not really. And again, they clutter the board a little bit when you have several stacks maneuvering next to one another. Normal, two-dimensional cardboard counters would have just had the same functionality. Another gripe that I have about the production that to me hinders gameplay a little bit is in those beautiful player rates with the wooden cubes and the wooden cylinders. They look great. You feel like you're playing Power Grid and also Napoleonic War game, best of both worlds. But I cannot escape the impression that you would just be able to keep track of things much more efficiently if you had a track with numbers printed on it and you were moving a cardboard counter right and left as you lose units or gain new units through game effects. Same thing for fatigue. You could just have a counter that moves right and left as you accumulate or reduce fatigue. Especially because, as you may have seen, the different tracks are very close to one another. So here you have a line of cubes for one unit, here the fatigue track for that unit, and here the cubes for the next one. Now as I'm there with my big fingers adding fatigue, I just kind of mess up the cubes around it, which kind of looks annoying, so now I'm spending time rearranging them. What I do in fact very often is simply to add fatigue from one side and to slide it down in a line. That's okay, but I don't know, maybe it didn't have to be that way. As for the game itself, the design is really fun. I definitely enjoy the system. I enjoy the card-driven engine, as I enjoy a lot of card-driven war games in general. Some card-driven games, from time to time, you will find yourself stuck with a hand that doesn't allow you to do much. Here I like the fact that the cards are key, are crucial, and yet they do not really define how many things you're doing. You can still move everybody. You just draw a card each time, and it's just that by having cards you can add more flavor, you can have more effects, you can prepare surprises here and there, you can affect combat depending on when you can play your card, etc, etc. They add flavor, they have possibility, they had the hand management, so real gameplay options as you choose if you want to save a certain card for reserve, for recovery purposes, or you want to use it, and when you want to use it, and how you apply the effect, and so on and so forth. I like that the cards give you a nice range of options without making your ability to do things on the board contingent on the hand that you receive. The hand that you receive tells you how you will do things, but you'll still be able to do a lot of things every turn, and that to me is real fun. And then just I like how much historical flavor has been hardwired into the decks. High initiative numbers and high movement numbers for the French player. You don't have to worry about modifiers and rules. Draw the darn card and now your French units activate faster, move faster, etc, etc, etc. The history, a lot of historical factors have been translated into the cards, and so you simply draw cards and history happens. The two sides tend to work historically, and the same thing of course for some of the commanders, for some of those other special effects. But generally speaking, you really have an interesting range of historical factors, so a lot of chrome that is implemented through gameplay without you having to worry too much about things. It feels very natural. That's what I probably was trying to say. The game flows organically, flows naturally, with a lot of interesting and tough decisions for both sides. Because there's a lot that you can do, but also a lot that you want to do to score points, delay your opponents, and the fact that you can score points either by controlling locations or by eliminating enemy units. Again, it's a very interesting dilemma there. Am I gonna run after your units, or am I gonna go to try to inflict pain on them and score points, or am I going for the location, giving you the burden of the attack? So it's a map that doesn't have many locations when you really look at it. There are some of those locations, I don't know, that really will come into play. I'll say there aren't many locations that really matter. There are at least 2, 3, 4 highways, and there isn't a large number of units to deal with. So it's simple. You really get a sense. You always get a good sense of what happens and what could happen, but still the decisions that you have there to make are tough and interesting. And the swings of fortune that the cards will bring are gonna be sometimes surprising, but usually not immense, I guess. I get the sense that the game still rewards good gameplay. So in general, I really enjoy Napoleon 1806. It is a really good war game because it gives you a strong sense of historical feel. It is fun to play as a game. It looks good from time to time. It looks a little too good. I wish the production had been slightly more Spartan here and there, but as is, the design is absolutely engaging and definitely a very strong design, and one that I would recommend to anybody who enjoys games about the period, war games in general, and also you newbie, you beginner war gamer, you're always looking for games to start with a hobby. Here you have a game that definitely is a war game, not a Euro game with a war theme, definitely a war game. definitely a very good one, and definitely accessible even to players that are new to wargaming. So Napoleon 1906, really good game.